Welcome to Reformed Thinking. In English, if we want to make someone sound supreme, we usually stack adjectives on top of their title.
Right, we call him the great, almighty, unmatched, absolute ruler.
Yeah, but ancient Hebrew didn't do that. To show absolute, terrifying, cosmic supremacy, they used a completely different mechanism. They just made the noun plural.
It is a completely different way of thinking.
It really is. So, today we are taking a deep dive into the Net Bible First Edition notes on Psalm 8, along with a brief look at the introduction to Psalm 9.
And we are really going to investigate the precise linguistic choices here.
Yeah, our mission is to look at the theological concepts extracted straight from the original translator's notes. Specifically, we want to see how the grammar itself communicates God's absolute sovereignty and humanity's assigned status in the cosmos.
It is a massive topic.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
We are going to look at the raw manuscript data, the textual puzzles, and the massive theological implications of words that are thousands of years old. And you, listening at home, you are going to see how relevant this ancient grammar is today.
I am really looking forward to this.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the very first note we have sets a staggering baseline for everything that follows.
It really does.
The translators point out that in the title of Psalm 8, the plural form is used to communicate the Lord's absolute sovereignty. I find it fascinating that a grammatical choice, simply making a noun plural, carries that much theological weight.
Yeah, it is brilliant.
We usually think of plurals just meaning, more than one. But here, Hebrew grammar uses plurality to convey supremacy and scale.
That structural reality of the Hebrew language is a fantastic place to start our analysis. As you mentioned, modern Western languages rely heavily on descriptive adjectives to elevate a concept.
Right.
But the Hebrew linguistic system operates with a different set of tools. It can use the plural form not to indicate multiple entities, which, by the way, would be polytheism.
Yeah, and that would contradict the entirely monotheistic framework of the text.
Precisely. So instead, they use it to indicate magnitude and intensity. Scholars often refer to this as the plural of majesty.
The plural of majesty. I like that.
Yeah. When the text utilizes this plural form in the title, it is a grammatical mechanism signaling that the sovereignty being discussed is not a localized rule. It is not limited over a specific geographic territory.
So it's bigger than that.
Much bigger. It is a comprehensive, all-encompassing reign. The grammar itself is preaching a theological reality before we even get into the poetic verses of the psalm.
Wow.
The text establishes the boundaries of the discussion immediately. We are dealing with a sovereign who possesses total authority over the cosmos.
That makes a lot of sense when you consider the worldview of the original audience. I mean, they were surrounded by cultures with pantheons of localized deities.
Oh yeah, everywhere.
Like gods of the river, gods of the storm, gods of the harvest. By using the plural of majesty right out of the gate, the text strips away any idea that this god is just one among many localized authorities.
That is a great point.
And this leads right into the next major linguistic tool highlighted in Note 3. The text uses the Hebrew word for name, but the notes clarify that this operates metonymically for God's reputation.
Metonymy.
Yeah, metonymy is one of those literary devices that sounds incredibly technical, but we use it in everyday speech all the time without realizing it.
We really do.
Think about how we consume news. You might hear a reporter say, "The White House issued a statement today." We all know the physical building of the White House did not draft a document and speak to the press.
Right, the building didn't hold a press conference.
Exactly. I mean, the phrase the White House stands in for the president and the administration. The ancient writers use this same device. When they speak of the Lord's name, they are not simply talking about the phonetic syllables used to address the divine.
Right.
They're talking about the reputation, the character, and the established track record of the sovereign. The name carries the full weight of the person's identity and their actions in history.
The White House analogy captures the mechanics of metonymy perfectly for a modern listener.
Oh, thanks.
In the ancient Near Eastern context, a name was never just a functional label placed on a person for identification. A name was inextricably linked to essence and recognized authority.
How so?
Well, if a king conquered a city, he would place his name there, signifying that his authority now governed that space. Erasing a king's name from a monument was considered tantamount to erasing his existence and erasing his historical achievements.
Wow, so it was a very physical, tangible claim.
Yes. So when the psalmist speaks of this name being majestic or awesome across the earth, it is a declaration that the sovereign's reputation is universally acknowledged.
That is massive.
It is. The translator's note ensures we do not read this through a narrow modern lens where a name is just a word on a birth certificate. It is the sum total of the sovereign's revealed character.
Which brings us to a rather challenging reality in textual translation. This is addressed in Note 4 regarding the phrase, which give your majesty on the heavens.
Ah, yes, the textual puzzles.
Yeah. The notes frankly state that the Hebrew verb form tena, which might be an imperative, is corrupt.
Right.
I am glad we were hitting this term early because I want to push back a little, or at least ask for some serious clarification on how translators operate.
Go for it.
When a modern reader sees the word corrupt applied to a biblical text, it sounds highly suspicious. It sounds malicious, like someone deliberately tampered with the manuscript to hide something or alter the theology.
That is a very common misconception.
So in the realm of manuscript transmission, if a text is labeled corrupt, what do translators actually do? How do they justify swapping out a word?
Wow.
It seems like a massive leap to look at tena and say, well, the grammar is broken here, so we are going to amend it to natata or titan. I understand they are trying to make the syntax readable for us, but how does that process work conceptually? How do scholars make that call without compromising the integrity of the text?
That is a crucial question for anyone seeking to understand how ancient documents reach us today. In textual criticism, the term corrupt does not imply a malicious conspiracy.
Okay.
It refers to a localized disruption in the manual copying process over thousands of years. We have to visualize the reality of ancient scribes.
Right.
They worked by candlelight or sunlight, copying massive scrolls by hand. Sometimes a scribe's eye might skip a line, or a drop of ink might smudge a letter.
So it's just human error in the copying?
Exactly. And in the Hebrew alphabet, several letters look visually identical if you are not looking closely. For example, the letter Dalet and the letter Resh are incredibly similar.
I can see how that would cause issues.
Yeah. When the resulting word in this case, tena, disrupts the grammatical syntax to the point where it cannot function logically in the sentence, scholars have to step in.
What year?
They look at the manuscript evidence, the surrounding context, and the strict rules of Hebrew grammar to determine the most likely original reading. By suggesting the emendation to the perfect verb form natata or the imperfect form titan, they are restoring the grammatical function of the verse.
Oh, so they are fixing a clear typo based on the grammar rules.
Yes. What's fascinating here is how the note outlines another major variable in this very same sentence. It is the introductory word asher.
Right, I saw that.
The notes explain that asher can act as a relative pronoun, meaning you who, or it can function as a causal conjunction, meaning because.
And that single pivot changes the entire theological flavor of the verse.
It really does.
The note gives us the literal translation possibilities. It can read, you who placed your majesty upon the heavens, or it can read, because you place your majesty upon the heavens.
Right.
If it is you who, the text is simply identifying the sovereign. It is a descriptive title telling us which God we are talking about.
Yes, just an identifier.
But if it translates to because, then it introduces a logical rationale. It provides the core reason for the praise being offered. It becomes a cause and effect statement, like, I am praising you because you placed your majesty upon the heavens.
That is a brilliant way to frame it.
And to back up their work, the translators do not just offer a guess. They cross-reference other instances of the phrase, place majesty upon. The cross-references are so helpful.
They really are. They point us directly to Numbers chapter 27 and 1 Chronicles chapter 29 to show how this specific idiom operates elsewhere in the historical narratives.
Which proves a lot.
Yeah, they are proving that this concept of placing majesty upon someone or something is a highly recognizable pattern in the ancient literature. It is often associated with the delegation of royal authority.
The cross-references to Numbers and 1 Chronicles prove that placing majesty upon is a recognized idiom for delegating authority or displaying glory.
It definitely builds confidence in the translation process.
It does. But the ambiguity of Asher remains a brilliant example of how ancient languages can hold multiple valid structural readings simultaneously.
It is wild how one word can do that.
Yeah, the notes are giving you, the reader, the tools to see the text in 3 dimensions rather than flattening it out. And this careful parsing of options continues into the very next verse.
Right. Note 5 addresses the statement, you establish strength because of your foes. The notes bluntly state that the meaning of this statement is unclear in the original Hebrew.
Another puzzle.
Yes. The Hebrew text uses the word az, which translates directly to strength. However, the ancient Greek translation of the Old Testament, known as the Septuagint or LXX, substitutes the word ainus, which translates to praise.
Wow, strength versus praise.
Exactly. The translators of the Net Bible note that they follow the reading of the LXX, choosing praise instead of strength.
This is a spot where I have to pause and question the underlying logic, not just of the translators, but of the ancient worldview itself.
Okay, let's hear it.
I understand the mechanical choice of following the LXX to resolve an unclear Hebrew phrase. But logically, if we put ourselves in the shoes of an ancient Israelite, how does praise stop an enemy better than strength?
That is a very fair question.
If I am a Judean king facing a literal hostile army marching over the hills, or an avenger, as the text says, my first instinct is to build a thicker wall, forge more bronze weapons, or muster physical strength.
Right, practical defenses.
Yeah. The idea that praise, which we typically associate with singing, liturgy, or vocal declaration, operates as an actual defense mechanism against a literal violent enemy seems entirely counterintuitive. How do we reconcile the choice of the word praise with the violent reality of foes and avengers in the ancient world?
To reconcile that tension, we have to look closely at what Note 6 tells us about the nature of these enemies and how the grammar frames the defense.
Okay, lay it on me.
The notes point out that the singular forms enemy and avenger in this verse are collective nouns.
Meaning what, exactly? I mean, precisely.
This means the text is not talking about a single individual hiding in an alleyway. It is talking about broad, systemic, hostile opposition. Furthermore, the note draws our attention to the hit-pale participle of the verb nakam, a form that also occurs in Psalm 44.
The hit-pale form.
Yes. In Hebrew grammar, the hit-pale stem often carries a reflexive or iterative sense. It paints a picture of an adversary who is actively, continuously, and relentlessly seeking vengeance.
Oh, wow.
So you have a massive, collective, relentless, hostile force. In the logic of the ancient Near Eastern worldview presented here, human physical strength, the Hebrew word eyes, is entirely insufficient to counter an overwhelmingly large collective threat.
Right, you can't fight that with a sword.
No. But praise, the Greek word ainos, directed at the sovereign whose majesty covers the heavens, invokes divine defense. The praise functions as a public acknowledgement of the Lord's absolute sovereignty, which we established in the very first note.
No.
Therefore, the praise is what silences the foe because it calls upon the ultimate cosmic authority to intervene on behalf of the speaker.
That reframes the concept in a highly practical way. It means the sound waves of the vocal praise are not acting like a physical weapon knocking the enemy over. The praise acts as an alignment mechanism. It aligns the speaker with the absolute sovereign, and the sovereign is the one who actually causes the collective enemy and the iterative avenger to cease their hostility.
Yes, the sovereign does the heavy lifting.
It is a massive paradigm shift from relying on personal, physical fortification to relying entirely on the established reputation, the metonymic name of the sovereign.
It really is.
And as we move into verse 3, covered by note 7, we see another structural quirk of the Hebrew language that requires the reader to actively participate in constructing the meaning.
Yes, verse 3.
The text reads, "When I see your heavens, the works of your fingers, the moon and stars which you established." The notes point out that the verb see is understood by ellipsis in the second half of the verse.
An ellipsis.
Yeah, for anyone listening who might be rusty on their grammatical terms, an ellipsis is when a word or phrase is intentionally left out of a sentence because it is logically implied by the surrounding context. It forces the reader's brain to carry the action forward.
The ellipsis of the verb see maintains a highly specific poetic rhythm.
It keeps things moving.
Yeah. The Hebrew writer avoids awkwardly repeating the verb in every clause. The act of seeing the heavens automatically extends to seeing the moon and the stars. It creates a continuous visual sweep of the cosmos for the reader.
I love that visual.
You look up, and the action of your gaze carries across the entirety of the night sky. The text uses anthropomorphic language, stating that the fingers of the sovereign have crafted this massive, intricate astronomical system.
His finger.
Right. This vast cosmic visual setup is entirely necessary for the intellectual and theological pivot that happens next. We move abruptly from the staggering macro scale of the heavens down to the microscopic scale of humanity.
It's a huge zoom in.
It is. This brings us to the famous cosmic question in verse 4. What is mankind? In notes 8 and 10, the linguistic breakdown of the specific Hebrew terms used here is provided. We see the word Enosh for man and the phrase son of man.
And those aren't just referring to one guy.
No. The notes clarify that both of these terms are used in a collective sense, referring to the entire human race, not a specific historical individual.
I really want us to lean into these collective nouns because it fundamentally changes how we read the question. The question is not, what is this one specific guy doing here on Earth?
No, not at all.
The question is aimed at the entirety of the human condition. When the text uses the word enosh, it is gathering all of humanity, every generation, every demographic, every civilization into one conceptual bucket.
A collective bucket.
Yeah. And to prove how this phrase son of man functions collectively, the source provides us with specific cross-references, Numbers chapter 23, Psalm 146, and Isaiah chapter 51.
Those are crucial texts.
If we look at those references, they all deal with human finitude. Numbers 23 says, God is not a man that he should lie, or a son of man that he should change his mind.
Right.
Psalm 146 warns against putting trust in princes, in mortal men who cannot save. Isaiah 51 asks why Israel fears mortal men who are like grass.
Like grass.
Yeah.
Very fragile.
Exactly. In each of these instances, the phrase is utilized in a representative manner to describe the frail, finite, mortal nature of human beings in stark contrast to the divine. It is a linguistic reality check.
It is indeed.
After looking at the moon and the stars established by divine fingers, the text forces us to look at the collective frailty of Enosh.
The contrast established by the grammar is staggering.
It's night and day.
On one side of the equation, you have the absolute permanence and the silent majesty of the celestial bodies, ordered by the sovereign. On the other side, you have the collective human race, which, in the grand scope of the cosmos, seems entirely insignificant and incredibly fragile.
It makes you feel very small.
But this is where the grammatical choices of the text deliver a massive theological shock to the ancient reader. Note 11 addresses the specific verbs used to describe God's interaction with this seemingly insignificant collective humanity.
What verbs do they use?
The text states that God remembers him and cares for him. The notes specifically highlight that the two verbal forms in verse 4 are imperfect verbs.
Imperfect verbs.
Yes. In Hebrew grammar, the imperfect form operates very differently than in English. It is not used to describe a completed, static action in the past. The notes clarify that these imperfect verbs describe God's characteristic activity.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
The grammatical choice of the imperfect verb means this action is not a one-off thought. It is not as if the absolute sovereign looked down one random Tuesday, noticed humanity struggling, and then got distracted by a supernova in another galaxy.
Right, he didn't just move on.
No. The phrase characteristic activity implies a constant, ongoing, habitual posture. God characteristically remembers humanity.
It is an ongoing posture.
To you, the listener, I want you to consider that contrast thoroughly. You have the heavens, which the text says were crafted by the fingers of the sovereign, an image of highly detailed artisanal work.
Very deliberate.
But the vastness of that astronomical creation does not diminish the sovereign's attention toward the collective, frail human race. The grammar demands that we view this divine attention as a steady state. The sovereign is characteristically mindful.
It is an incredible thought.
It completely upends the expectation that a massive, absolute ruler would ignore the smallest components of the kingdom out of sheer busyness or apathy.
It entirely subverts the ancient Near Eastern expectation of how the divine realm operates.
Oh, so?
Well, if you look at the surrounding mythologies of the time, the gods of the surrounding cultures were often depicted as aloof, annoyed by human noise, or completely indifferent to human existence unless they required sacrifices for sustenance.
Oh, right. Like the humans were just annoying pests.
Exactly. But the Hebrew grammar here, specifically the use of the imperfect verbs, constructs a theology of sustained characteristic care. The absolute sovereign's mind is occupied with the collective human race.
That is beautiful.
And this characteristic mindfulness sets the stage for the specific actions taken toward humanity, which we find detailed in the incredibly dense translation notes for verse 5.
Verse 5 gets intense.
Yes. Note 12 is perhaps one of the most technical pieces of linguistic analysis we have in this entire text. It centers around the peel form of the Hebrew verb kazar.
The peel form.
Right. The notes explain that this specific form means to decrease, to be devoid, or in this precise context, to deprive, to cause to be lacking.
Let's make sure we clarify what a peel form actually does, because throwing around terms like that can lose people quickly.
Good idea.
Think of Hebrew verb stems like the transmission in a car. A standard verb form, the qual stem, is like driving in first gear. It describes a simple action.
Okay, first gear.
But when a writer shifts a verb into the peel stem, they are throwing the sentence into four-wheel drive. It intensifies the action or makes it causative.
I like that analogy.
So the text is not saying humanity just accidentally wound up lacking something. The Peel form is active and causative. It means the sovereign is the one doing the depriving or causing the lack. It is a deliberate, designed limitation placed upon humanity. We are caused to be lacking a little bit compared to a higher category.
And they point out how incredibly rare this specific usage is. It appears only here and in Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verse 8.
Whenever a word is that rare, you know the author chose it for a highly specific reason.
Absolutely. And then the notes introduce a grammatical fork in the road regarding how this action connects to the previous verse, mentioning the prefix verbal form with the vav consecutive.
The vav consecutive.
Yes, the vav consecutive is a vital mechanism in Hebrew syntax. Think of the vav consecutive like a hinge on a door. In Hebrew, adding this tiny prefix flips the timeline or the logical flow of a verb.
A hinge, okay.
The notes explain that it can function in two distinct ways in this specific verse. First, it could act as a hinge that carries on the characteristic nuance of the imperfect verbs we just discussed in verse 4.
So carrying the ongoing action forward.
Right. In that case, causing humanity to lack a little is part of God's ongoing characteristic activity in the present. Alternatively, the vav consecutive could indicate a direct consequence of the preceding statement, so that you make him, meaning the characteristic mindfulness results in this specific act of creation and intentional limitation.
Okay, so it is either ongoing or a direct result.
Yes, and they also offer a third option, suggesting some scholars prefer to read this as an independent clause. This breaks the hinge entirely and translates it as a new past tense sentence. You made him.
An independent clause.
Right. If we read it as an independent clause describing a past action, the notes suggest it might refer specifically to the historical creation of the first human couple, Adam and Eve, echoing the language of Genesis chapter 1.
This brings us to a massive translation challenge, and honestly, one of the most debated words in the entire Hebrew text, Elohim.
Oh, definitely.
The text says mankind is made to lack a little from Elohim. But what is the exact referent of Elohim here? Does it mean God alone with the capital G, or does it refer to heavenly beings, the angelic assembly?
It is a huge debate.
The notes synthesize a massive amount of textual evidence to help us weigh these options. If the text is an independent clause looking back at the historical creation of Adam and Eve, we have to look at the language of Genesis 1.
Genesis 1.
The notes point out that Genesis 1 says, "Let us make man in our image." The image was imparted to that first couple, but the notes clarify that this text is not limited in its focus to that historical event alone, because all of mankind shares the image imparted to the first couple.
We all share it.
Right. Therefore, the psalmist can speak in general, collective terms of the exalted nature of the entire human race.
The concept of the shared image is a vital theological bridge in the text. It means the status conferred at the moment of creation is democratized across all of humanity throughout history.
Democratized, that's a good word for it.
But the identity of the plural pronoun, us, in Genesis 1, let us make man, directly impacts how we translate Elohim in Psalm 8.
Because of the us.
Exactly. The note suggests that the allusion to Genesis 1 implies a broader referent for Elohim, one that includes God and the other heavenly beings in the divine council.
The divine council.
Yeah. To support this broader definition, they pull in several fascinating cross-references. They cite Genesis chapter 3, verse 5, where the serpent tells the woman, "You will be like the heavenly beings who know good and evil."
Using Elohim there.
Right. They also cite Genesis 3.22, where God says, "The man has become like one of us." Furthermore, they point to Psalm 82, verses 1 and 6, where Elohim clearly refers to the individual members of the heavenly assembly gathered together.
It is a stunning amount of textual evidence pointing toward a broader heavenly council context. The text is positioning humanity on a very specific tier within a cosmic scale.
A very specific tier.
We are made a little lower than the Elohim, the heavenly beings. We are situated just under the angels in the hierarchy of creation.
Yes.
And to solidify this interpretation, the notes provide one final, crucial piece of historical evidence. They note that the Septuagint, the ancient Greek translation of the Old Testament, explicitly translates Elohim as angels in this specific verse.
The Greek translators made a definitive choice there.
They really did. And that Greek translation is the exact source text used when this verse is quoted centuries later in the New Testament book of Hebrews, specifically Hebrews chapter 2.
Right.
The translation lineage from Hebrew to Greek to the New Testament validates the concept that humanity was created in close proximity to the heavenly assembly, possessing a shared image, yet deliberately caused to lack just a little bit of their celestial nature.
That deliberate limitation, however, is immediately balanced by a staggering elevation in status.
Well, elevation.
Yeah. In notes 13 and 14, the text examines the phrase, "You crown him with honor and majesty." Note 13 points out that the verbs here are, once again, imperfect verbal forms describing God's characteristic activity.
There are those imperfect verbs again.
Yep. Crowning humanity with honor and majesty is not a past finished event. It is an ongoing reality. But it is note 14 that provides the massive theological payoff for the listener.
What's the payoff?
The terms honor and majesty are not just generic compliments about human dignity. The notes explicitly state that these terms allude to mankind's royal status as God's vice-regents. This directly connects back to the Genesis 1 mandate, where humanity is commanded to rule over creation on behalf of the Creator.
We need to define what a vice-regent actually is because it is not a term we use at the grocery store.
No, definitely not.
In the ancient world, a vice-regent is someone who rules in the place of, or as a representative proxy for, the absolute sovereign. It is a delegated authority.
Like a stand-in.
Yeah. Ancient kings would conquer a distant territory and place a physical statue of themselves in the center of the town. That statue was the image of the king, functioning as a constant visual claim of his sovereignty over that space.
That is a great historical detail.
The absolute sovereignty we saw in the plural title of verse 1 is now being shared in a limited but highly real way with collective humanity. We are the living statues.
We are the living statues.
We are crowned with the royal attributes of the sovereign to act on the sovereign's behalf in the material world. And the notes do not just leave this as an abstract, high-minded theological concept.
No, they don't.
Note 16 details the strict grammatical reality of this delegated rule. The verse says, "You cause him to rule over the works of your hands." The notes highlight that the perfect verbal form used here probably has a present perfect nuance.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the present perfect nuance is arguably the most significant grammatical observation in the entire text regarding human purpose.
The present perfect nuance.
Right. In English grammar, the present perfect describes an action that happened in the past, but has continuing relevance or active effects in the present.
So it's not over.
No. The notes explicitly state that this verbal form refers to the continuing effects of God's original mandate from Genesis 1. The delegation of authority to rule as vice-regents was not an experiment that failed in the Garden of Eden and was subsequently canceled. The grammatical structure insists that the mandate remains active. The continuing effects of that original crowning are still in operation today.
I want to make sure we truly grasp what a present perfect nuance means practically for the reader. It means the rule over the works of God's hands, the reality of having everything placed under his feet, as note 17 points out, is an ongoing, present reality.
It is happening right now.
It bridges the ancient poetic text directly into our modern, mundane existence. To you, the listener, I want you to consider your own daily tasks.
Yeah, think about your day.
Whether you are managing a household budget, writing code for a software company, organizing a massive corporate spreadsheet, or cultivating a backyard garden, the text argues that you are operating within the continuing effects of this vice-regent status.
You are ruling.
You are interacting with the works of your hands, representing the absolute sovereign in the material world. The text gets incredibly specific about the scope of this management in notes 18 and 19, listing the beasts of the field and the paths of the seas.
The specificity of mentioning the beasts of the field and the paths of the seas demonstrates the comprehensive nature of the delegated rule.
Terrestrial and marine.
Right. The vice-regent is responsible for the terrestrial environments and the marine environments. The entire material ecosystem is placed under the delegated authority of the collective human race.
It is a breathtaking vision of human purpose.
It is, and it is grounded entirely in the grammatical structures we have analyzed. The imperfect verbs indicating characteristic activity, the present perfect nuance maintaining the mandate, and the specific collective nouns identifying all of humanity.
It all builds on itself.
The text constructs an architecture where humanity is physically frail, intentionally limited compared to the heavenly assembly, yet simultaneously crowned with royal majesty and tasked with the ongoing management of the physical universe.
It is a brilliant paradox. We are dust that rules.
Dust that rules, that's good.
And the psalmist frames this entire theological masterpiece with a specific poetic device, which the notes point out in note 23. They note that verse 9 uses the poetic device of inclusio.
Inclusio.
The psalmist ends specifically the way he began. The concluding refrain, "O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth," is identical to the opening of verse 1.
I love inclusio.
It is very effective. It functions very much like the framing of a great novel or the structure of a complex musical symphony. You introduce a primary booming theme at the very beginning. You take the audience on a massive, winding progression through different concepts and tensions.
In this case, zooming out to the stars and zooming in to human frailty.
Right. And then at the grand finale, you bring that original theme back. It encloses everything within the opening concept.
The inclusio serves a vital theological function here. It ensures that the exalted status of humanity, our crowning as vice-regents, and our rule over the beasts and the seas does not eclipse the absolute sovereignty of the Lord.
So it keeps us in check.
Exactly.
Yeah.
By wrapping the discussion of human majesty inside the identical refrain praising divine majesty, the text visually and audibly subordinates the vice-regent to the absolute sovereign.
We don't get too big for our boots.
Right. Everything humanity achieves in its delegated rule, in the end, redounds to the reputation, the metonymic name of the Lord. The structure of the poem itself prevents the reader from concluding that humanity operates with total autonomy.
Our rule is firmly enclosed by his absolute sovereignty.
Yes.
So what does this all mean as we transition into the next text? Because the source material does not stop at the end of Psalm 8. It gives us a brief but incredibly dense introduction to Psalm 9.
Psalm 9 is quite a pivot.
The notes provide context in note 24, explaining that in Psalm 9, the psalmist, likely speaking on behalf of Israel or Judah, praises God for delivering him from hostile nations. The text celebrates God's sovereignty and justice, calling on others to join in boasting of God's greatness.
Right.
Interestingly, the note also mentions that many Hebrew manuscripts and the ancient Greek version, the LXX, combine Psalms 9 and 10 into a single continuous text. That manuscript detail alone shows how fluid the ancient text divisions could be. But the tone shift is what really catches my attention.
The tone shift is severe.
It really is.
We move from the majestic cosmic order of Psalm 8, where humanity is ruling over the sheep and the oxen in perfect harmony, straight into the brutal reality of hostile nations and a plea for deliverance and justice.
It brings us crashing back down to the realities of a fallen world.
It does. And right at the beginning of Psalm 9, we encounter another significant translation puzzle in the title. Note 25 addresses the uncertain Hebrew term olmut.
Olmut.
The notes are entirely transparent about the ambiguity here, presenting two distinct possibilities for how to handle this ancient word.
I am fascinated by how they break down the options for olmut. They note that some manuscripts divide the form into two words. Olmut.
Olmut.
Right, which translates to according to the death of the sun. That sounds incredibly specific and potentially tied to a historical tragedy or a specific event in the life of the writer.
It does sound like a specific event.
However, they also present the alternative, noting that the LXX assumes a reading of al-Almamet, which translates as according to Alamuth.
Two very different readings.
Conclusively, despite these divergent manuscript traditions, the notes state that the phrase most likely refers to a particular tune or musical style used in ancient worship. It is a brilliant detail because it forces us to remember that these texts were not just dry theological treatises read silently in a library.
They were functional.
Yeah, they were functional musical pieces used in a living, breathing community.
Acknowledging the musical context is essential. It highlights the performative nature of the text.
It was meant to be heard.
Right. Whether it was sung to the tune of the death of the sun or some other specific arrangement, it was designed to be internalized through music and corporate singing.
Singing it together.
But the juxtaposition of these two psalms, as presented in our source notes, creates a real theological tension. Psalm 8 outlines the ideal.
The continuing effects of the original mandate.
Yes. Mankind crowned with royal status, managing creation as a collective vice-regent under the absolute sovereign. But the introduction to Psalm 9 introduces the disruption of that ideal. Hostile nations, the need for divine justice, and the reality of violent human conflict.
It is the collision of the cosmic ideal and the harsh historical reality. And that brings us to a final provocative thought to leave you, the listener, with today.
Let's hear it.
We have spent this deep dive looking at the intricate grammatical architecture of these translation notes. We have seen how plural titles establish absolute sovereignty, how imperfect verbs declare God's characteristic mindfulness, and how present perfect nuances confirm our ongoing royal status as vice-regents over creation.
We covered a lot of ground.
We did. We are tasked with managing the works of the sovereign's hands. But as the notes on Psalm 9 reveal, we are simultaneously operating in a world fractured by hostile nations and systemic conflict.
A fractured world.
So if Psalm 8 frames humanity with an ongoing royal mandate, how does the reality of human hostility, the very enemies and collective avengers mentioned back in Psalm 8.2, complicate this ideal picture of human dominion?
That is the question.
How do we exercise our vice-regent status when the collective humanity we are part of is often acting as the hostile foe? It is a massive tension the text introduces, but leaves for us to wrestle with. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking hard questions of the text, keep looking closely at the grammar, and keep seeking the underlying truth in the words.